This is Beyond Busy. I'm Graham Allcott. I'm the author of a number of books, including the global bestseller How to Be a Productivity Ninja, and I'm the founder of Think Productive. We help people to make space for what matters and get more done, and we partner with some of the world's leading companies who share our mission to transform the world of work. Beyond Busy is where I explore the often messy truths and contradictory relationships around topics like work-life balance, happiness and success, and explore with interesting people what makes them tick. In short, this is where we ask the bigger questions about work. My guest today is Ndidi Okezie. She's a rising star in the charity world, the CEO of UK Youth, and a board member on 3 boards, including Centrepoint. We talk in this episode about being thrown in at the deep end, having courageous conversations, the idea of audacious confidence, kindness, and much more. It's a really wide-ranging episode and the last one before our summer break. It's a really good one. This is Ndidi Okezie. I'm here with Ndidi Okezie. How are you doing?
I'm really good, Graham. Thank you so much for having me.
Let's start with what you're doing right now. So you're Chief Executive of UK Youth.
Yep.
So I guess the first place to start with that is, as you arrive to have this conversation right now, like what have you been doing today? How's your day been so far?
How's my day been? We are what are we in now? Two weeks into launching our new strategy. So we've got a few strategy events happening later on this week. So I've been debriefing on those. And also we are heavily in the middle still of restructuring and hiring and whole kind of recruitment stuff. So I've been feeding into lots of recruitment work as well.
And so in terms of your journey with UK Youth, so you've been in post as Chief Executive for, is it coming up 2 years?
16 months.
16
Not that
months.
I'm counting the actual down to the day or anything, but yeah, 16 months.
16 months. And it's been quite a journey that you've had in that time. Before we dive into that, just for people who don't know what UK Youth is and what it does, do you want to start there? Just paint a little picture of the organisation that you're leading.
Absolutely. So UK Youth is a leading charity with a vision that all young people are equipped to thrive and empowered to contribute to every stage of their lives. We are an open network organisation. We have about 7,000 youth organisations and nation partners in our network. And based on our new strategy, we are very much focused on unlocking youth work as a catalyst of change that we believe is needed now more than ever. Fundamentally, we are a bit of a hybrid organisation. So we're an infrastructure body for the youth sector. We are direct programme delivery organisation as well. And we're a campaigner for social change. So collectively, our work is to kind of build a movement of like-minded people who are determined to create a society that understands, champions, and delivers effective youth work for all.
And I guess the last few years have been just quite a challenging time in the whole youth work space, right? So just give us a flavour of that challenge over the last few years.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one. I think the sector at large, I think, has seen, I think it's something like between 65% of cuts over the last 10 years, like across the sector, just
Wow.
in terms of the kind of the investment that's gone into youth work as a standalone thing that young people should have access to. And that's going into the pandemic, right? And then you've got the pandemic, which has just essentially exacerbated all the challenges, all the issues at both a sector structural level, but then more importantly, at the level on which youth work addresses, like, so the kind of support, provision, experiences, pathways that youth work typically supports young people through, the pandemic has just, made that 10 times more difficult. And one of the ways that I try and bring it to life for people is that last year, if you think about every single sector that was making its case for support in terms of either government funding or, whatever that might look like in terms of support to help the sector still be there on the other side, one of the things that I noted was that whereas places like education, health, arts, all these sorts of other sectors were making their case based on the merits really of the impact that they had seen. The youth sector was having to do that, but was also trying to essentially make its case for itself. And there were lots of conversations that really, for me, illuminated that, oh wait, people don't understand this sector. Like, I'm talking like government all the way through, that we're having to explain who we are. We're having to explain why, when you're talking about young people and you're talking about what you need to get ready in terms of being there for young people on the other side of this, we were having to make a case as to why we should be in the conversation. And that just felt like such an eye-opening moment that for me just really crystallized why our strategic focus is what it is as an organization, because that's just something we can never afford to be in a position of again.
Yeah, and obviously the last year or so dealing with COVID, we've had all these situations where it's been a constantly changing thing. There's been times when schools were closed. And, I think one of the things that we're starting to see now is the kind of reports and data around homeschooling, and how for certain kids, they were diligently homeschooling and for certain other kids, they were just not involved in homeschooling. And I guess traditionally, people look at youth centres as the place where kids go if they're sort of not at home and they're not at school. That's the place that kind of mops up that provision and gives young people a sort of place to throw their energies. But I guess there's a big issue there generally, isn't there, around how young people have been hit by the pandemic? Because obviously young people weren't necessarily the most vulnerable in terms of getting COVID and getting sick, but actually they've probably had the biggest impact in terms of having to put the rest of their lives on hold.
100%. And it's interesting, just, even before that, I think your point about if it's not school and it's not home, where do young people go? Is such an important one, because the sad reality is that for most young people, there isn't a youth provision for them to go to. And that's and I think one of the questions I think is a bit of an entry point into why this conversation is so important, why this issue is so important, is to ask any and everybody, where do young people go? where do you think young people go when they're not going to school, when they're not at home? Because there's a question there about when home isn't a place you can go, what happens there? And when there are issues with home, you and I both have an experience of Centrepoint. When you think about how young people end up homeless, there is so many different things that tend to happen for young people before that can happen. And having that safe place to go is such an obvious thing. But I think the sad reality is, as a society, we can't answer they can go to a youth club, they can go to a youth provision, because we know that the majority of young people don't have access to that. So I think that's just an interesting way into this topic for people, I think, in terms of trying to understand why we're advocating for youth work the way that we do. I think, to your broader point, it took a while for this to kind of reach the kind of mainstream news media, but I think now most people can understand and accept that young people are one of the, if not the hardest hit demographic coming out of COVID, whether it's from the economic perspective in terms of job prospects, whether it's from academic learning, whether it's from issues around online safety. Now there's all of this conversation around mental health challenges and the kind of steep rises we've seen in self-harming and sadly suicide rates as well. All of these things, I think, digital divide, the issue around access to the things that we all just assumed would just kind of carry on. I think the sad reality is that COVID has really exacerbated existing things. If you work with young people, none of these things I've mentioned are a surprise, but for so many people it's put it under a spotlight in a way that I think is helpful in terms of understanding, but clearly it has really exacerbated the issues as well. So on every single one of those metrics, we have stats that would just really chill you, just in terms of what young people are having to deal with at this point.
So what's interesting, I suppose, is that you've got this exacerbation, this exaggeration of the space that you're advocating for and sort of working within, you know, in terms of the work that you do. And then I guess also just COVID itself has exaggerated just the challenges of being a chief exec, right, as well. So I read a thing, so UK Youth has got this place called Avon Tyrrell, which is like an outdoor learning centre. And of course, you had to close that through the pandemic. So that's a huge loss of funds for the organisation. And then you're 6 weeks into the job and having to furlough people and make people redundant. So I'd just love to hear about how you've managed to just personally deal with just such a huge to-do list over the last, you know, year or 18 months, and just what's been your personal experience of that?
Yeah, and I think it's a great question, but I think the reality is I've got nothing to compare it to, right? Like the most ironic or saddest part of all of this is that this is my first CEO role. Yeah. So I've kind of came in with such naivety about what the job entails anyway. And I think even without a pandemic, it would have been a really interesting learning curve. But yes, the pandemic almost accelerated things that, you know, maybe it would take 5 years for you to experience as a chief executive. So, you know, the idea of having to lead virtually, having to lead where you haven't established relationships and dynamics, having to shut down parts of your organization, you know, restructure the organization. We furloughed 65% of the organization at one point, and then had to make redundancies when we realized and accepted that there was no coming back, you know, based on how we were going in. So we had to kind of, you know, recut our cloth, as it were. And you're doing all of that on a premise of, you know, asking people to trust you that don't know you. And I think that there was a lot there that I went through, a lot of self-analysis, you know, self-doubt, and a lot of it was this idea that an experienced CEO would just have made different decisions or would have made choices in a different way. And, you know, I don't think any of that really bore out, but the reality is that you think that's the case, right? And there's one reflection I shared on LinkedIn, I think last year, which was, it reminded me so much of my initial years teaching, where I was training, I was developing as a teacher, but I had year 11s, I had year 13s, I had people for whom the fact that this is my like training ground is all well and good, but it's their one shot at this year.
Yes, right.
It's there, and there was such a load and a weight of responsibility that was, are people paying for your learning curve? And what do you do with that at night, right? Like there was just something that I couldn't. It took me a really long time to reconcile the idea that, oh man, like, you know, if there was if somebody had been a CEO longer, maybe that person's experience would have just been different at this time when you really, really deserve to have as smooth an experience as possible. So there was a lot, that was, I think, the biggest pressure for me. And then on top of that, just the reality of all the, you know, the juggling plates, all the spinning plates, all the different things that you had to do, that, I really quite quickly dropped all the commitments I'd made to myself going in about prioritizing your own development and prioritizing your own well-being and, like, you know, being a role model about how you balance things. All of that just completely disappeared. And it was working nonstop. It was for me, the pandemic was good, but not good in the sense that it took away those moments in the day that forced me to stop working, whether it's travel, talking to people, just, you know, casual chat. This one, I could literally wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and work all the way through to 9 o'clock at night, and no one would stop me. And I did that for far too long, I think.
Wow. Yeah, because it's just it's like the all those travel times and you know, walking around and all that, like that's the mental space, right?
Yeah,
where you start
100%.
to join the dots between what you're doing. And start to think strategically and all that. And if you're just heads down with it the whole time, I mean, that's relentless, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
I'd love to just come back to something you said a minute ago about your, like, regardless of COVID, you were saying that you would have certain naiveties going into the chief exec role. And I definitely feel like I had a lot of naivety when I did my first charity CEO role as well. I'd love to know what you particularly, looking back on it, what do you think was particularly naive or different? And just how has it surprised you, regardless of COVID, just the role being different to what you expected?
Yeah, and it was a great question, and for so long last year, especially, every time I was asked that question, I kept on thinking, I haven't even been able to process it. Like I haven't had the space and the time to just sit back and say, actually, what has that been like? And I feel, a bit clearer now, but I still feel like there's probably a lot to unpick for me personally. The top two things I would say were, I always talk about the preparation that I did beforehand because it was really important to me to get this right. It was an organisation or an area of work I cared a lot about. It was, it was the ideal kick-off point for me in terms of this journey. So I really wanted to honour it. And it was a really big deal to be a CEO for me. So it was also something that I just wanted to honour. I was very, very conscious of the eyes that were on me, more so than I even realised. With the reaction once I was announced just completely overwhelmed me. But it just increased and intensified the pressure to not fail. So I think I came into it really wanting to honour all the people that were just celebrating my appointment, and that for whom I was a kind of a symbol that okay, yes, it's possible, it's done. I remember, I always say, I remember the recruiter that placed me I think they invited me on a podcast actually pretty soon after I'd been appointed, and one of the stats was something like, I always forget it, but it was something like only 6% of the charity not-for-profit sector are black or women, something like that. So there's a 6% stat and there's a 2% stat. I can't remember which now.
What, in terms of CEOs of charities?
Yeah, yes. Yeah. And it was just chilling. Like, yeah. I don't know what, it just like petrified me. And so I think I'd already kind of honoured it in terms of preparation, but let's just say I turned up the dial. So I did all the prep work coming into it. And I've obviously been a leader and a senior leader for a really long time. So I kind of felt like I'm pretty comfortable with this space. But one of the biggest reflections for me is when they say the CEO role is a lonely role. That's not just words. Like, that is something that I really thought I was ready for, but it's so real. And it's something that I think I realised, in a sense, that one of the ways I understand it now that I try and communicate is that up until that point, regardless of who you are, where you what work, what level, all of those things, you have two things. You have a peer group and you have someone that is above you, that supports you, right? Like that there is just those two dynamics. Whoever you are, you have that. And as a CEO, you don't have that. And I really thought that my senior leadership team were still that. Like, that's my team. But they are, but they're not, right? Like, there is a difference. And that became really crystal clear to me in a way that I think I was quite ignorant of. And then the above you, the chair and the board are a different dynamic to the above you that you've been used to. Because it's just a different relationship. It's a different level of accountability. So you are really on your own. And no one sees the organisation, experiences the organisation, thinks about the organisation in the way that you do. And so that's a very isolating experience. And again, I think I thought I knew what that was going to be like, but it's very, very palpable how how much that impacts you as an individual, I think.
Yeah, I kind of have similar reflections on that. I just think it's similar for me being the founder of a business.
Yeah.
As it was when I was in that CEO role. And actually, I'd never really thought about becoming an entrepreneur before. And I think definitely, just the experience of how it is all on you and everything is your fault and everything is your job, right? Just experiencing that as the CEO of a charity definitely made me think, oh, maybe I could run my own business. And I'd not really thought about it like that. That wasn't really part of my career plan before, I don't think. But I suppose, yeah, the what I certainly observed in my time in the charity world as well is that where you've got a really good partnership between the CEO and the chair, that gets you so far. But like you say, the chair is still at that point saying, all right, so we're in partnership about what we need to do, but then you go and do it, and then it's still lonely, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so just a huge bundle of challenges to sort of get your teeth into over the last year. And I suppose the other thing, just to pick up on from what you were talking about before, was that sense of responsibility as a Black female CEO. So, because obviously your job is not to be a Black female CEO. Your job is to be the CEO. So it's almost like having two jobs, that you're carrying this sort of sense of responsibility. So I'd just love to just dive into that a little bit more and just, I suppose the question is, what were you seeing as the things that you had to do differently or to dial up or exaggerate to really kind of carry that responsibility well?
Yeah. The thing is, I don't think I get to distinguish it in the way that you did. And I think I would love to. I would love to think about it, well, you're hired to be a CEO and that's what you are. But the reality is that I am a Black woman CEO. And actually, each of those things comes with its own thing. And then you compound them together. And again, I've experienced the gender dynamic. I've experienced that through my own leadership journey where, you are invited to speak on things because you're a woman. You're invited to feed into issues and topics because you're a woman. I've been invited to speak into issues on race for many, many years, right? So it's never really been something I've been able to decouple. As a teacher, students would come to you because they could identify with you in certain things. You got to speak on issues from a place of connection, whether that's a locality, based on London, what it is to work, grow up in particular environments, all the way through to, being African, being Black, being female. So I think we all draw on all aspects of who we are. There is no, I don't know, I've never experienced a way where I just get to be the thing I am, as opposed to all of those things together. But yeah, I think again, the CEO level, I wasn't expecting it. I again feel very naive walking into it, but when my appointment was announced, I just cannot explain to you the reaction and the responses that I got, the messages, the people kind of reaching out like, oh my God, celebrating the appointment more than celebrating me, if that makes sense. So it was like, oh my God, a Black woman is leading, a leading youth charities, an organization in the third sector. And this was all before everything that's happened. So I didn't even know all the issues the charity sector had when it came to this. So you can almost understand that now. But at the time, I was really taken aback. And so, yeah, I do think that there have been moments where I felt like, give you a great example. So UK Youth is 111 years old, right? This is an organisation that has weathered so many transitions, wars, for goodness sake, like all sorts of things.
They've survived a few government funding cuts before, right?
Just a few things. And pandemic aside, if you can imagine I say those words, one of my biggest fears last year was that the organisation would close under my watch. And all I could think was, history is going to say a Black woman made UK youth fold.
Gosh.
That was all I could think was, and I just didn't think that history would remember there was a pandemic. All I remembered was you were given the baton, you dropped it. And it's going to be more than Ndidi Okezie dropped it. It's going to be all these other things. So I've never been able to decouple the my race or my gender from my role. It's all felt very intertwined.
That's fascinating, and just that's a real weight. It's such a weight of responsibility.
Yeah. It definitely feels that way.
I suppose the other thing around race that I wanted to talk to you about, maybe this leads on quite nicely, is so in the aftermath of George Floyd, you asked a lot of questions of your team, and you ended up coming up with this #YoungUnBlack campaign around it, and it just sounded like, and I suppose the other thing to throw in there is, like you say, what's also been uncovered over the last year is just a lot of structural racism in the charity sector, and of course, far beyond that, but we're talking about the charity sector right now. So what was that process? What did you do? How did you approach it? Like, how did you get the organization into a place to, because you're still quite new and everything else is going on. What was the process around asking questions about race and really understanding those issues?
I mean, I think if I'm honest, where it came from was my own complete surrender to the fact that I didn't know what the hell to do. So like for me, I was, I think at that point, what would be March, April, May, like maybe I had just been on go, right?
Yeah.
Like this was me just like go, every trouble, everything, furlough staff, all of that, go. And the murder of George Floyd brought me to my knees. And I think I was just emotionally spent, physically spent. I had absolutely no idea what to do, but I knew I was meant to be doing something. And I always say this, and I think some people may think it's an interesting story, but I really was bowled over into like a fetal position on the ground. I was emotionally so traumatized by what I'd seen. I've got family in the States. I just can't. I could get emotional now thinking about it. Like it was an incredibly traumatic experience, and it just felt exhausting. It just felt so. It was one of those moments where I really did think, oh yeah, there's nothing we can do. Like this is just never going to stop. It's relentless. And I think there was just a moment there for me where and I didn't do it on my own. I had somebody kind of speak into my life, as it were, kind of like shake me up a bit, but very much realizing that, wait, hold on, I do have agency. Like if this isn't the moment to lean into your agency as a CEO, then what is?
Right.
But I didn't want to approach it as if I had answers, because I really didn't. But what I was feeling was this, like my phone was buzzing, my emails were on fire, like everyone was like, I don't know what to do. I feel like all of these emotions were coming out, and my staff were saying the same thing, just all this emotion, just this pain. And literally all I could think to do was, we just need the space to talk. Like that's all we need. And that's all I did. So I literally emailed all my staff, a whole staff email. It wasn't mandatory. It was, look, I'm going to put this time in the diary. It's just literally, I called it a space to talk. That's it. No agenda, nothing else. We're going to come together. We're going to share. We're going to listen, and we're going to just talk. And the majority of staff came, and we heard from, I shared what was going on for me. We heard from other Black colleagues. Then we heard from non-Black colleagues just talking about what was going on for them. And it was such a powerful, real, raw, emotional, challenging, candid conversation that we ended it by saying, what can we do with what we've just experienced here? And we made
Yeah.
2 commitments. One, we would carry on internally with it, and we up to today we still have the Space to Talk session. But we said, why don't we simply offer that out? So let's create a call to action to have a space to talk. And that's where the Young and Black campaign was born. You know, we did it in partnership with others that shared this need to convene a safe space for young Black voices to be platformed, to be listened to, and for people to reflect on what they were sharing.
Yeah.
And that's all that happened. And I could not have predicted what it would end up being, and you know, the resources and the people signing up and the corporate partnerships that have kind of come from it. But there was no kind of massive plan at the beginning. It was literally, what do we do with this pain? And it was like, right, that I really believe, I am such a believer in the humanity of people. You know, it's probably my most naive trait, but it's the thing that has fueled me to where I am today. That at the core, I believe that if we can see the humane in others, I think that's the foundation on which real social problems can be solved. So it was a very easy thing for me to do, and to champion why it was important to do, and to accept the backlash and the, you know, what happens when you lift your head up above the parapet, especially on a topic of race, and all of the backlash that kind of came for me personally was worth it, because we saw all the benefit that was also coming from that.
That's super inspiring. I really hope you're not naive, because I feel like I share that naivety. And God, if that's what naivety is, then sign me up. You know, I'm totally with you there in just believing in humanity. And I think I suppose having the confidence to say, as a leader, I'm not gonna give you all the answers. I'm gonna create the space. Like, that is, for me, that's just like fundamental leadership, right? Is that leadership's about listening too. And what you did is said, let's all create the space to listen here. So yeah, just hugely powerful. What was the bit you said just at the end there about the backlash that you had? So like what was that?
This is such an interesting... I remember telling my some of my senior team about this, and my staff, that like, there probably has not been one single time I have posted about race, talked about the Young and Black campaign, talked about the issues around this online on an event where I've not been trolled. Like, I've not had...
Really?
Oh, 100%. Like, it's so... There was one event that we did where we hadn't turned off, I don't know, something. They hadn't turned something off. So the team got to see it and were, like, so, like, upset at, like, you know, what they... And I was... It really took me aback, because I was like, oh, God, that's normal. Like, that's, like, that's just what you experience. And, you know, there were things even more sophisticatedly, which was around... you know, why is UK Youth doing all this black stuff? I guess it's because, you know, they've got a black CEO, and like, you know, thankfully my board were just absolutely rock stars about it. But I know peers that, you know, their boards were uncomfortable about making a statement or like taking a stand, all those things that, you know, we look back on now, where it was so controversial to put out a public statement denouncing the murder of a black man. But it was, and there were times I would go into rooms and people wouldn't talk about it, and I would just have to say, like, hello, hi, there's a thing happening, the world is on fire in an area, we just gonna pretend, and yes, I might be the only person that looks like me in this conversation right now, but this is a very real thing. And you know, there's a lot that comes with that. There's a lot of and this goes back to my point about naivety. I didn't quite realize the fear that CEOs have about their job security. And like, you know, the way that people weigh up what they can or can't do because of dynamics with their board, or dynamics with whether it's the charity commission or whoever. And there were so many things, it just didn't occur to me that like somebody would have an issue with it, or that would be enough to stop me doing what I thought was right. And I definitely made some mistakes on that, but it just has never occurred to me to dial myself down in any way in terms of the things that I believe or the things that I wouldn't or wouldn't speak out for. So that's kind of what I mean. There was a real, I would say, emotional cost, but usually I'm fine. Like it's part and parcel of being a leader, growing into this. But at the time I was very, very fragile because I was just emotionally spent. So I think I had to be much more intentional about protecting my emotional state.
Yeah.
Because it did feel like an onslaught for quite a few months there. It was a lot.
Well, I mean, you're still here, and I'd love to just hold that thought, and let's come back to some of the ideas around resilience and where you are now. A couple of things I just wanted to pick up on. I'm actually shocked that even in like youth sector Zoom calls and LinkedIn posts and stuff, that you're getting trolls in those spaces. That, like, yeah, I mean, I'm surprised by that. The other thing that you said there, that just to sort of tell a similar story. So I told this story just after the George Floyd murder as well. So my son's mum, we're not together anymore, but she's black from South London, and I remember one time we got kind of like verbally attacked and the threat of physical attack by this kind of drunk man walking down the street in Brighton. This was, and the moment that was most interesting about it was not just the feeling physically threatened. Now, you know, I'm a fast runner. Like so if I ever sort of get into situations of physical threat on my own, I can run away. But obviously I'm with her. I'm not going to run, and she can't run as fast and all the rest of it. So we were just kind of walking quickly to get away from the situation, and we got away from this racist guy and sort of started to calm down. But the moment for me was realizing how, like, she just moved on to the next thing in her head. And I was like, what the absolute, like, you know, I was, you know, just kind of swearing. And for me, this was like the first time I guess, sort of experienced that racism in that moment, you know, and to her, that was just like growing up in South London, just second nature or whatever. Her dad told me some great stories as well, by the way, about getting stopped by the police with a golf club in his in the glove box, which is what he had to do driving around Brixton in the 70s, and the police being like, what are you doing? And he's like, I'm going to play golf. And they're like, we don't believe you. And he's like, look in the glove box. And in the glove box, he always used to carry a tee and a golf ball just to like, just for the effect. But yeah, like just that whole thing of you know, how blasé she was about it. And I guess that's where you start to realize, you know, just the extent of your own naivety around some of these things. So yeah, just, I'm still shocked that you're getting that in what would be seemingly safer spaces, right? Like on LinkedIn or in youth sector stuff. Let's come back to where you are now, and obviously just having been through that over the last few months. Do you feel like you're now getting away from that period of getting up at 5 a.m. and working till 9 p.m. and it just being one thing after another, an onslaught? Like, are you still in it? Has that finished now? Like, what's your relationship with that sort of style of busy?
It definitely feels different. And I think it's because I think the long hours thing I might need to come back to, but like I think there's just no way to describe how last year and, you know, the last whatever months has felt like. It was not just the work, it was the emotional weight, it was you're just like, I one of the things I often say again is that I've chosen complicated, complex, big, knotty context to work in. Like that's been my, like, since coming out of uni. So I'm used to working hard. I'm used to working really long hours. That's, you know, ask my friends and family, like that's a thing about me. What I've never ever experienced till last year was the inability to switch my mind to what I wanted to switch it to.
Yeah.
So I just couldn't turn my mind off. Like I couldn't sleep and rest at night. I couldn't decide, oh, I'm just going to like chill out and watch this film. It was constant. And I've never experienced that before. And that's definitely dialed down 100%. And I think one of the things that being able to launch the strategy a couple of weeks ago was so important for me, because it felt like a year in the making. First of all, it felt like that was what I wanted to do from the moment I started. But we've also concluded our internal restructure and like, you know, reorganize the organization, and we've like launched that as well. And so we're in the making that work stage. So there's still like, you know, we're still heavily recruiting. We still have lots of things about ways of working, but it feels like, oh yeah, this is what I signed up to. Like this is making all of that work. You know, one of my senior team describes a strategy as a promise. And it's like, now we need to live up to our promise. And I just love that as a description. But like, that's what energizes me. So I feel different because all of that work feels like it's pointed to something that isn't just about survival. It's something very much, this is the imprint we want to make on this issue. Let's go. That definitely feels different.
So it's like if you took COVID away and you took George Floyd away and financial instability away and all that, that's what your first 100 days would have been.
Exactly,
I guess, right?
Graham. Like that, you know, my beautiful plan that I had to like grieve and like literally bury. I would have been able to. That's what I really came into this wanting to do, and I feel like I'm finally able to get back to that.
So I suppose your first year and a bit of being a CEO, it's been a little bit of a crash course in lots of stuff. What do you think you've learned about yourself, and what do you think you've learned about the role?
I think those are definitely the questions I haven't quite figured out yet. What have I learned about myself? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that one. I really don't. I think I'm still very much in judgment mode. So I think like all I can think about is that like, oh, I could have done this, should have done this, all of that stuff. So I haven't got enough distance to figure out, you know, and that's generally a problem I have. I'm always looking at what hasn't been done as opposed to what I have done. So that's definitely a problem. But in terms of learning about the role, like that, I've definitely learnt that all those things that you read in books, it's different reading it to living it. And like, again, I struggled so long because I wanted to find a way of making that learning make sense. And the closest I've come to it is the analogy of running a marathon. And I don't know why I've landed on this, because I've never run a marathon and I'm very likely never to run a marathon. But I know people have, and I know, like, you know, I know what seems like it's involved. And one of the things that I think it is that there is almost, the preparation is so hard. There's so much you need to do to get ready for it. If you're serious, you can go really far in preparing for it and doing all the things that you could possibly do, almost textbook preparation. It doesn't matter how great you've prepared. It's still hard to run a marathon. Like there's nothing about running it that is, like, it's hard to do it as well as you've prepared. Running a marathon is still a hard thing to do. And that's the way that I think about being a CEO, that like I had thought preparation would water down the difficulty of doing it. That was my mindset going in, that if I could be really prepared, if I could be read up, if I could be planned up, then it would be easier. And, you know, again, the reality is I don't know what it would have been like without a pandemic and without, global, marches around the race. But I still think it would have been harder than I was anticipating, because of the reality of what it means to be a CEO is, I think, something you cannot explain until you're in it. And you cannot feel until you're in it. And the impact of what that does to who you are, your psyche, your confidence, your rationale about who you are, there's so much it attacks that I think if you're not if you're not able to really rally down into why are you doing this? Why is this important to you? Who are you? I think you will allow the world and others to tell you who you are.
Yeah.
And if you don't have something to push back on it, that's a really scary experience, I think, to engage in.
I'd actually written down as a question to ask you what drives you, and that just feels, like I totally agree with that. And I think you have to just have a really clear sense of what your own values are and why you're in it and what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
And I think that point's a really well made one, that if you don't have that, then you are at the whim of how other people will try and mold the experience for you and stuff.
Yes, exactly.
So that sounds like it's something that you've had to reflect on and have front and center a lot over the last year. So what are the main things that drive you?
Yeah, and it really is. And it's good because it's the same thing that's always driven me. And but I've had to lean on it more, obviously, in the last year and a bit than I've ever had to before. And it's funny because when I came into the role, one of the first things I said to the organization in like kind of my first all hands kind of meeting was, what is our why? Like, why are we here? Because if we don't know our why, the things that we experience are going to shape us and move us and shake us, and will mold to the situation as opposed to shaping the situation ourselves. And this was in January. I had no idea what was about to come. But for me, that question of my why is so integral to why I get up in the morning. And for me, it very much is anchored in my Christian faith, anchored in the notion that it's not just happenstance that I'm where I am doing what I'm doing. And if I'm in a space, if I'm in a conversation, if I'm in an interaction, I'm meant to make that thing better. I'm meant to be a positive influence in that space. Just this is a day to day. Like, that's the reason I show up is to try and make a difference. But at the much more micro level, this, I feel such a weight of responsibility to take the baton on from my forefathers and the people that have come before me on matters of social justice, equality, making the world a better place for the generations that come behind you. That is at the very roots of who I am. And so I've chosen work that focuses on young people, that focuses on inequality, focuses on social justice, because I feel like I am benefiting from the literal blood, sweat and tears of people who have sacrificed, that came before me, that there is this weight of responsibility that I can't drop the baton for the generations that are coming behind me. And so that's what motivates me. And that naivety that I spoke about before is rooted at this idea that I really do believe that everything that we see is man-made. Like, every injustice, every social construct, every way that the world works is something that man as a society has decided. And so if it isn't working, we have the agency to decide something different. And so if we have that agency, how dare we not, right? Like, that's the thing that just makes me, it's not fair. It's not right that some kids just don't have and have to experience less than others. I just think that's nonsense. There's no reason for that. And if we just set the world up to be different or to operate different, the systems that surround young people, if they operated differently, that wouldn't be the case. And my contribution to that work is what drives me.
I just want to say, where do I sign up? Yeah, absolutely. Hallelujah to all of that. Before we finish, it feels like with everything that you've been through, the topic of this podcast is just particularly, like, it's just a particularly important one, right? Getting beyond busy and getting out of that sense of busyness and into a space where, because, you of all people, I mean, you deserve some lightness, and it feels like there's an awful lot of weight in everything that you're doing, in the responsibility that you're carrying, and to get out of that as well and switch off and just have lightness in your life as well as that weight. So I would just love to hear your thoughts on what it means either right now or in the future to get beyond busy and to be in a different way of working to how you've been over the last few months.
Oh, great. If I knew the answer to that.
That's why this podcast is 4 years and still going, right? It's like the eternal question. Oh, my
Lord. It's so funny.
And I have no answers either.
I was saying to a colleague today, actually, I think I was reading somewhere yesterday that this kind of article about, don't judge yourself because you haven't emerged out of the pandemic, like with this whole new, set of hobbies and skills and like self-development
and like and all that.
And like, rediscovered balance in your life. Like don't, and I ate that article up because I can feel myself starting to feel guilty because I haven't like found this beautiful balance and I haven't, rediscovered, this hobby that has been laying dormant, that it really has been a matter of survival and it's been a matter of like go, go, go. And I've wrestled with your question even before this role, and it's only become even more challenging for me here because I honestly just don't even feel like I have the headspace to even think about what that could look like. And now, to be honest, my energy is ironically on making sure others are able to do that. So like I think about my senior team and like my staff more broadly, and just like how do I make sure they are doing that? And it occupies my mind far more than am I doing that? And I've been told, I realise the irony of that, and I realise the power of role modelling and all of that good stuff. But if I'm being really honest, that's the stuff that I'm exercised about much more than my own personal balance. Because I still haven't quite figured out how to ensure that they are able to do that as well.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I just had Jodie Cook on the podcast, who is the founder of JC social media agency, and just written a couple of books that won Business Book Awards in the last year, Instagram Rules and Raising Entrepreneurial Kids. And she was saying exactly the same thing about her agency. She basically said, look, when COVID hit, my thought was everyone's going to be fearful, and my job is to kind of mop up that fear so that they're not fearful and just do the fear for them, which I guess in the one sense feels admirable, and it does feel like that's part of the weight of responsibility of being a CEO, but also, like the other part that you said there, the role modeling. And, like over time, it would be unsustainable if your focus was only on everybody else's balance to the detriment of your own, right? Yeah. What do you think it would ideally look like if you could wave a magic wand and then tomorrow you have a different relationship with your work that prioritizes you? Is there anything that would be particularly at the front and center of that?
I feel like that's such a great coaching question. Like, what would it look like if you could do that? Oh gosh. I honestly think it's the really unsexy stuff, which is that, like, you're just not, glued to your phone 24/7. That you're like, you're able to go do something else. Like I haven't, my mum stays with me. I'm she's been shielding throughout all of this, and it's been a very challenging journey around the vaccine. So like I haven't seen family and friends in a year and a half. Like we haven't all the things that that my commitments to my friendships and to my family would have pulled me away from, because I would have felt equally committed to them. So I would have made time for birthdays, for visits, for parties. All of that's been taken away. And so it would even just look like being able to do that, like just being able to just go and hang out with my friends and family and not be looking at my phone and not be worried about, what's next in terms of work. So I can't wait, honestly, to get back to that. I haven't seen my nieces or my godchildren in a really long time, and video calls just not cutting it at this point. So yeah, I just can't wait to finally be able to just go hang out. Goodness, let alone travel. I can't even imagine that anymore. Yeah, so I'll take that as the next step.
Yeah, well, that's a great step towards getting beyond busy, and feels like a really good place to leave it. I just want to say one thing before we finish, which is that you're a trustee of Centrepoint, and I've been on the board of Centrepoint. You're talking about marathons, and be under no illusion they're going to ask you to run the marathon, because that's why I ran the London Marathon good few years ago, is because Centrepoint said, hey, we want a trustee to do it.
Centrepoint, UK Youth seems to believe that I'm going to be running a marathon at some point.
There's no way you're getting out of this. It's happening.
All I keep saying is, I will find you the people to do it. Don't worry. And I am the number one cheerleader. Don't worry. But
nice.
Oh my goodness, can't get my head around trying to do it.
I just want to say, just super inspiring, just listening to all of that, and just congratulations on everything you've been doing, and just with everything that you've got going on. It's just a pleasure and an honour to have you on here for an hour. So I just want to say thank you so much for being on Beyond Busy. Thank you.
It's been such a lovely conversation, and I'm really just can't wait to continue just seeing what you're going to do, strength to strength. I love your show, so thank you so much for the honour of being able to be on it. It's exciting.
Thank you. That's very kind. Thank you. This video is sponsored by Think Productive, home of the Productivity Ninja. We help people and organisations to increase their impact and make space for what matters through a range of workshops, programmes and coaching. Head to thinkproductive.com to find out more. Are you interested in booking me as a speaker for your event? You want to sign up for my Rev Up for the Week email? Do you want to buy some of my books? Or do you just want to find out what I'm doing right now? It's all at grahamallcott.com/links. And if you like this video, please like, subscribe and share so we can make more. Thanks for watching.